Halloween has never felt the same since I lost my family. But this year, I decided to try and recapture a bit of what I once loved about it. I set out the decorations early, even bought the good candy, hoping the night might help me feel a connection again to my past. There was nothing out of ordinary. First few hours went as expected. A steady stream of kids, in costumes that ranged from cute to downright terrifying, came and went. The neighborhood felt alive with laughter, shrieks, and the occasional call of a parent telling their child to wait up. I gave out candy, even chatted with a few neighbors as they passed by with their kids. As the night wore on, the flow of children slowed. I noticed the silence more. I settled into my armchair by the door, glancing at the clock now and then, half hoping a few more kids would show up. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a single trick-or-treater standing alone. The kid wore a mask, something intricate and unsettling, but I couldn't put my finger on why. The child's gaze felt piercing, as though they were looking right through me. "Trick or treat," the child said, their voice soft but strangely intense. I handed over a piece of candy, trying to smile. "Great costume," I offered, though the words felt hollow. It was a lie. I was too unsettled to appreciate it. "Do you remember Halloween when you were a kid?" the child asked suddenly. The question threw me off balance, as though I were the one on trial here. "Yeah, sure," I replied, shrugging. Back then, Halloween was a little different. The child tilted their head. "Do you remember the time your dad took you trick-or-treating? When you got lost for a few hours?" My stomach tightened. That wasn't something I ever shared with anyone, not even my family. I'd been 6 years old, and it was one of the scariest memories of my childhood. I shook my head, brushing it off. "Who told you that?" The child just smiled, a subtle, knowing smile. "We remember things, don't we?" I forced a chuckle, hoping to dispel the sudden heaviness. "Who are you here with?" I asked, glancing around. "Are your parents close by?" "No," the child replied, almost casually. "But they're around." Around? The word hung in the air, charged with something unsaid. I tried to ignore the chill crawling up my spine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this kid was somehow familiar. "Did you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been found that night?" the child asked, voice laced with something that sounded like pity. I froze. Memories I'd long buried began to surface. The fear, the darkness, the feeling of being utterly alone. "No," I replied, my voice more defensive than I intended. "I don't think about it. It's in the past." The child's gaze seemed to sharpen, and they took a small step closer. "But sometimes the past doesn't stay where it belongs, does it?" A bead of sweat trickled down my neck as I struggled to respond. "Look, kid," I said, forcing a weak laugh, "whoever put you up to this must think it's hilarious." "Oh, no one put me up to it," the child whispered. "I came because you needed reminding." Before I could answer, "Good night," the child whispered, turning to leave. "Wait," I called after, "wait." They turned and walked off, vanishing into the night as quickly as they'd come. I closed the door, heart pounding, and sat back down rattled. That was when I noticed. There, at the bottom of the candy bowl, was a small object. I picked it up and felt completely disoriented. It was a tiny locket, identical to the one I'd given my daughter years ago, a family heirloom I thought was lost with her. I didn't sleep that night. Who was that child, and how did they know? After decades as a costume designer, I thought I'd retired for good. But a few days ago, an envelope appeared under my door. Inside was a note, a series of bizarre sketches, and a sum of cash so large it nearly took my breath away. The note was simple, one last costume. I hesitated. Something about the sketches, the colors, the shapes, triggered memories of pieces I'd made over the years. Yet they were twisted, as though someone had tried to capture my designs but missed some crucial essence. I began working. The client communicated only through brief, cryptic messages, each more unsettling than the last. They requested specific details, materials, colors, and textures that were so familiar they felt like pieces of me. It was like I was sewing together fragments of my own history. Late at night, as I stitched a seam, I noticed something strange. The fabric was one I used years ago, for a dress that was linked to a scandal, one that haunted me for years. I couldn't explain how I'd acquired this material again, and the memory filled me with unease. Phone calls from the client started coming in, their voice distorted, each message pulling at memories I'd buried long ago. With every call, I felt like pieces of my past were being stitched into this costume. They seemed to know too much, even referencing names and events that no one should remember. Finally, the costume was complete. It was unlike anything I'd made before, haunting, intimate, and disturbingly familiar. I carefully packed it into a large box, sealed it, and addressed it to the cryptic return address provided, a simple suite number in a high-rise building I didn't recognize in a city miles away. I made sure the box was shipped out that afternoon, feeling an odd sense of relief when I watched it disappear onto the mail truck. When I returned home, the eerie heaviness that had lingered over my workspace began to lift. For the first time in days, I felt at ease. The next morning, as I was making coffee, I heard a soft thud at my front door. Curious, I opened it and found a large, unmarked envelope lying on the mat. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. I squinted at the grainy image, trying to make sense of it. It was the costume, my costume, hanging from a mannequin in what looked like a dimly lit hallway. But something was different. The fabric seemed almost distressed, fraying at the edges, as though it had aged years overnight. I brushed it off as a prank, perhaps a strange thank you from the client, and put it aside. But the following day, another Polaroid arrived, this time showing the costume standing in a new location, a shabby, cluttered room that looked abandoned. The fabric appeared worse now, worn and stained. I could almost swear I saw faint handprints on the collar, like someone had grabbed it too tightly. That night, I couldn't sleep, haunted by the image. On the third day, I found the next photo on my doorstep. This time, the costume lay crumpled on the ground, smeared with what looked disturbingly like dirt, or worse, something dark and dried, seemed like bloodstains. The mannequin was nowhere to be seen. The fourth day brought the most unsettling Polaroid yet, the costume, on what looked like a sidewalk, with faint boot prints trailing away from it. The fabric was now unrecognizable, torn and weathered beyond belief, as if it had been worn through 1,000 nights and discarded. I reached out to the client, but the number I had was disconnected. And when I called the postal service, they told me the address I'd sent the costume to didn't exist. Confused and shaken, I started looking around my home, half expecting to find the costume back inside. But it never returned. Only the images did, each more warped and unsettling than the last, each showing it in new places I'd never seen before. The costume unraveling piece by piece, as if it were coming apart, thread by thread, until all that was left was darkness. When I received an invitation to Martin Ashcroft's Halloween party, I could hardly believe it. Martin was a famous artist, renowned for his disturbingly beautiful portraits. His work was magnetic, filled with intense emotion and dark complexity. Each portrait seemed to peer into its subject's soul, unveiling a hidden, vulnerable side. It was both thrilling and unnerving to imagine seeing his work up close, and to be invited personally felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The party was held in Martin's own home, a sprawling Victorian-style mansion on the edge of town. Just stepping inside was like entering another world. Dim, flickering candles cast shadows on the richly decorated walls, and the guests moved in and out of shadows in elaborate costumes, transforming the house into a gallery of strange, beautiful characters. Every detail seemed meticulously curated, down to the eerie, ambient music playing softly in the background, and the scent of old wood and leather that permeated the air. Martin himself greeted me near the entrance. "Glad you could come," he said with a slight nod, his eyes lingering on me just a second too long. "Feel free to explore." He gestured toward the grand staircase leading to rooms beyond. His house was like a labyrinth, and each room was an exhibition unto itself. In the first few rooms, I saw portraits of people dressed in Halloween costumes. At first glance, they seemed typical: vampires, ghosts, old-timey villains. But as I looked closer, there was something uncanny in the faces. The expressions were unsettlingly realistic, each one revealing an underlying sense of fear or sorrow. It felt as though Martin had captured these people mid-revelation, caught off guard by some dark truth only he could see. As I ventured further, the rooms grew dimmer, and the atmosphere felt heavier. Each new room displayed portraits that seemed to dig deeper into the psyche of their subjects. In one room, I noticed portraits depicting expressions of regret and fear that felt far too intimate, too raw. I looked around at the guests mingling near me. Everything felt too odd all of a sudden. It was as if Martin's portraits were no longer just paintings. They were capturing something alive, something real. And then there was a hallway leading to the far end of the house. Curiosity, or perhaps some unseen force, drew me down it. The hallway was different, narrower, with walls lined in deep red velvet that seemed to absorb the flickering candlelight. At the end was a single room, isolated from the rest, its doors slightly ajar. Inside, on the far wall, hung a single portrait, standing out starkly against the darkness. But the portrait was of me. I froze in the doorway, staring at my own face. It was unmistakable, the same costume I wore tonight, the same look in my eyes. But there was something different about my expression in the portrait, a hollow look that I didn't recognize. My face was painted in excruciating detail, down to a slight crease in my brow and a shadow under my eyes that hinted at something deeply unsettling. I looked as if I'd seen something I could never unsee. My pulse raced as I backed away, barely noticing the soft footfalls approaching behind me. I spun around to find Martin standing in the doorway, watching me. His eyes glinted with a strange amusement, and his mouth curved into a faint smile. "You're part of the collection now," he said softly. "Don't you want to confess? Everyone has secrets after all." I tried to laugh, brushing off the prickling unease crawling up my spine. "It's an impressive trick," I managed to say, my voice sounding more uncertain than I'd intended. "How did you paint this without meeting me before tonight?" Martin's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. "Memories are funny things," he replied. "Sometimes they don't even belong to us, yet they linger, woven into the fabric of who we are. Or maybe..." He paused, as if savoring the moment. I shivered, feeling as though the walls of the room were pressing in on me. I stepped past him, needing to escape his gaze, but he reached out and caught my arm. His grip was firm, his eyes searching my face as though looking for something hidden deep within me. Then he let go, slipping something small and cool into my hand before releasing me. I looked down to find a small, tarnished pendant. I recognized it instantly, a pendant I'd lost years ago, a personal token I'd never expected to see again. I looked back at him, but his expression remained unreadable. "You dropped this the last time you were here," he said quietly. I swallowed hard, confused and alarmed. I hadn't been to this town in years, even decades, and I certainly had no memory of ever being in Martin's house. But his words clung to me. I managed to stammer out a thank you and stumbled my way back to the main part of the house, slipping through the crowd toward the exit. I could feel his gaze following me, piercing through the murmur of the guests and the haunting strains of music. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a shock. I glanced back at the mansion, its dark windows seeming to watch me, and hurried away. But the nightmare wasn't over. The next morning, I found an envelope on my doorstep. Inside were photographs, all of them of me. I didn't remember the moments captured in these images, but in each one, I looked directly at the camera, as though staring right into Martin's eyes. The dates on the photos were strange, some of them years old, others recent, and all of them unsettlingly precise, right down to the time of day. I tried to convince myself that it was a prank, an elaborate setup, but then the photos started appearing inside my home. They would show up on my coffee table, slipped under my pillow, or tucked into books I hadn't opened in years. Each time, I looked more tired, more worn, as though Martin's gaze was draining the life from me. The fear has never left.